Happy Friday and welcome to Career Launch Live. I am your host, Catherine McCord, and today I have David Hatch with me from across the pond to talk to us about the crazy things that happen at work. We're just going to tell you some stories and we're just going to solve some problems with some of the weirdest, most bizarre stuff that we've seen that we were just like, what? So, David, before we get started, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me again. It's great to be
Yeah.
back. I'm David. I'm from the UK. I am primarily now a leadership podcaster. I've shifted what is at the top of my billing now. It used to be leadership trainer and project manager, which I still do all those things in my spare time, but it's mostly podcasting,
That's exciting. That's
isn't
cool.
it?
Podcasting's fun.
I think so. Obviously,
Yeah.
I wouldn't do it. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It is though. It's really cool. So I've like, and for anybody that's watching that doesn't know me, so I've got my background is in people operations and consulting and recruiting, all that kind of fun stuff. And I've been in leadership roles, I've been in exec roles, and I have seen some just bonkers things over the years, right? And I know you have too with the leadership coaching. So start us off. What's one of the examples of something you've seen that you were just like, now what happened here?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know about crazy. So a lot of these things are the stuff at the time that made me like really mad about it.
Yeah,
Whereas looking back, I can sort of laugh about some of it now.
right. Like at the time, it's like
Yeah,
it's not
yeah, no,
fun.
no. And I happen to know that you've already got a way better story than I can ever come up
Oh,
with, which I hope we're going to talk about again because I really enjoyed that conversation
we
last
will, we will.
time.
But what's one of yours?
I guess it's kind of similar to your one, but not quite as severe. So I think the most absurd thing that I've ever seen happen is a couple of senior managers literally in a shouting match in the office, open office in front of the whole company. I won't name names, obviously. Anyone who's
Ooh,
there knows who it was. Sorry, guys, but I'm not going to shame you.
well, right, yeah, yeah. No,
um,
don't do that.
but yeah, I mean, for everyone else in the company, there was just like this moment of, is that is that
How
really
did people
happening?
respond to that? Like, were they like confused? Were they scared? Like, what happened?
I think there were two camps, I think, that we can probably categorize people into. One was the group who just got up and walked out and didn't come back for a couple of hours. Which
Fair
wasn't I
enough.
wasn't in that group. I wish I had. It was a much better idea. And then the other group was the ones who just sort of tried to get their head down and ignore it and just get on with their work, which got
Yeah.
easier as the incident progressed. But
Gosh. I mean, and how
yeah,
long did this go on? Like these two
I
exact
mean,
like
it
sitting there,
was
leadership people sitting there screaming at each other.
yeah. So I was out when it began, and I walked in about halfway through, and there was about 5-10 minutes of it
Oh,
solidly. So it'd been going on for a little while before I arrived. Um,
that's a long time to be in a screaming match.
yeah,
Period. But
yeah.
especially in the workplace. So leadership screaming in the workplace. Let's dissect this because first of all, you don't want anyone screaming in the workplace. That creates a
No,
hostile. That's like the definition of a hostile work environment.
right? Yeah.
Um, and but when it's leadership particularly, what do you
Yeah.
like? What do you do?
Yeah, this is the problem, isn't it? And I think that's why we had those sort of kind of two varying responses of paralysis, basically. Because yeah, I mean, how do you do it? Do you try and step in? Do you try and calm it down? I mean, somebody did, and they got shouted at as well, so that
Well,
didn't
yeah,
work.
that seems like that's about how that would go.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I mean, really, I guess all you can really do if you're not in a leadership position is just ride it out and hope it doesn't get
And that's the
worse.
scary thing, right? Is that you're when it's leadership doing it, you're just kind of stuck. You're
Yeah.
just kind of, and we had somebody at Nicole come on an earlier episode this season and tell us a story about a coworker shouting at and standing over her, and that was a coworker, not a member of leadership. And I think it adds an extra fear factor because it's like, okay, if you're doing that, what else is going to be allowed? What's going to happen to me? What is going on? And it also to me, and tell me like if anybody there had this experience, to me that says this company is not stable.
Yeah. Not a good sign, certainly.
No, no.
Yeah, it's difficult because I don't want to get people in trouble or reopen old wounds. It was many years ago now, but
Right.
I mean, the context of the time, it was a difficult period in that company's life.
Yeah.
Wasn't the first such incident. At least, I mean, it was definitely way more severe than the previous one, which had been behind closed doors, at least.
Right. But
Um,
jeez.
yeah, the guy also was having a bad day. The guy who initiated
Well,
it.
we've all
But
had bad days.
yeah,
I
that's what I said at the time. I was like, everyone has a bad day, so does that mean it's okay now every time I have a bad day to
yeah, to just
go out
pitch
and
a
start
fit.
effing and blinding at people? Like,
Jesus.
no.
And I'm curious, was there any like threatening or bad language or anything like that? Or was it just we're screaming about the business names?
There was definitely bad language.
Okay.
I mean, certainly the bits of it that I personally witnessed, there was definitely bad language. There was a bit of throwing a keyboard on the floor, and then sort of stamping
Oh, so
around
we
the
also threw a
office.
fit like a toddler. Like we were
A little
throwing
bit,
things
a
now.
little bit,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I've seen worse
Oh
outside of
yeah.
work, but
Oh
yeah.
yeah.
And then kind of I mean, by the time I was there, it wasn't full on screaming, but it was definitely raised voices. And then everything
Definitely more
before
good.
that, I've only got what people have told me. So,
I
it's hearsay, Your
oh
Honour. I couldn't possibly
that's
comment.
yeah, right. Yeah. It's just what I heard. I when I think about that and from an HR perspective and having to handle that, and I've had to deal with a scream match not between two leaders, but a leader yelling at a subordinate and have had to come out and deal with that. And the way I handled that was just I came out and said, "Excuse me, I understand that we need to address something. Let's absolutely do that. Let's go into an office with a closed door and let's lower our voices so that we're not causing a disruption." But to your point, when it's two leaders, it's like, like, I mean,
Yeah.
I would still do that, but I would certainly understand other people not wanting to do that, especially if you're not in HR, because I was
Mm.
also in a position where it makes sense that I would be the one that stepped in. So if you're just a random person, it's like,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeesh.
There was no HR in the office that morning either, so that didn't help,
Of
I'm sure.
course, of course not. Like, why would there be? Why would there
Um,
be somebody there to help? It's like,
yeah.
oh,
Yeah.
it's like kids,
I
like how they know that they can get away with stuff. I think adults do the same stuff, you know?
Maybe. I don't know. It's hard. I kind of feel like he would have done it anyway. Or, sorry, not he, they. I'm not going to give anything away about who it was.
There's a lot
Too
of he's
late.
in the
Too
world.
late.
I think you're probably okay.
Yeah, we'll gloss over that.
We'll just gloss
Um,
over that little slip.
yeah.
I
But I
think,
think,
and
yeah.
and one of my stories is about aggression in the
Mhm.
workplace, as you well know. I told it on your show recently, um, and I so mine was a party, an office party that started great and very inclusive and very happy, very celebratory, and then went south so fast when the office, how would I say this nicely? The office, oh gosh, just disaster. I'm just going to say it. Just the office disaster of a human. Like great professionally,
Mhm.
not so great otherwise. The one always coming in telling their drama, the one always coming in spreading the drama, that person decided to slap a person for literally no reason. We were all standing there. None of us had a clue why this happened. Slapped the person. We got through that incident and calmed it down. I wanted to just fire on the spot, but that was ignored. So we continued, we got it calmed down. But then it got worse, as you know. It got worse progressively because then for a company function, I had planned everything up to this point in the party. Okay, like all that stuff. The owner wanted to plan the second half. And when we all showed up, we all arrived, we were at a restaurant where the women serve you naked or scantily clothed. And as an HR person walking into that, I was just like, So we're just trying to get sued? Is that what's happening?
Yeah,
Like, we're just trying to create an uncomfortable, uninclusive, like illegal, like environment. Like, I don't like why? Why was this it? And when I asked the owner, just legit thought that it would be funny. Like just didn't think past that. Just didn't
you definitely win on craziest stories. It's
on
not even a
bizarre
competition,
things.
is it?
Like like bizarre things of like why did this happen? Why? So dealing with that, and I wish that this would have happened a little bit later in my career because I would have
Mm.
handled it better. At the time, I got us all through it and then kind of dealt with it on the back end. Now I would have stuffed it dead and been like, okay, so we're going to pivot plans and we're going to go over here instead. And he could have just had, pouty feelings about it because like it was just so disastrous and it made people uncomfortable and it left us open to lawsuits. Like it was just nothing about that was smart or good. So as a leadership person, so here's a question I've thought of for you since the last time we told this story.
Ruh-roh.
Ruh-roh. If you were going to be coaching this leader, what would you tell them about why this was a problem and then how to correct it moving forward? Because I get the idea of wanting to do something like fun and laid back and kind of silly. Like I got that part right, but this just took it too far. So how would you handle that?
I think it's like with so much of leadership, I think it comes back to knowing your audience, doesn't it? Knowing your people in this
Yeah.
case. So if you really think it's funny personally, great. But I mean, you've got to be able to put yourself in other people's shoes and think about how they're going to perceive these things,
Mm-hmm.
particularly when there's the gender difference to think about there as well. And it's pretty fraught gender politics, let's say, involved in that particular situation.
I like
Trying to
that.
think of a
Fraught
diplomatic word
politics.
there.
I'm going to steal that. It was a
Yeah,
very fraught political
but
situation.
you know what I mean, though. And
Yeah.
I think I don't know. I mean, I can't imagine a situation where I would ever do that as a
Yeah.
leader, like, or in any situation,
Yeah.
frankly,
Just
like
why?
professional
Just
or personal.
why
But
are we doing this?
yeah, and
It
sense of humor is such a tricky thing as well. And
is.
if that was like the first and only joke he'd ever made, I'm guessing it might have been
It was
reading
not.
between the lines, but
It was not. But it was the most dramatic.
fair. Yeah, yeah, that's fair. And I think there's that when you've got the social event that you're trying to bolt onto work as well. I think the best way to do that is get other people involved. Never,
Yes.
ever, ever do it unilaterally because you're
Yes.
just guaranteeing a lot of people aren't going to have fun for a start.
Right. Exactly. So first of all, consider everyone, right?
Mm.
Duh. But also run these kinds of things by people. When you have kind of an off the wall kind of idea that can go really well. Okay, they're not this time, but there are in general, off the wall ideas can go really well when they're executed properly. So you want to bring in like HR, other
Mm.
leadership, run it by them, see how that's going to go. See, and maybe your idea just needs to be tweaked. You know what I mean? And maybe we
Yeah.
just, so like, for instance, my suggestion, had this been brought to me, would have been, okay, so you want to do something kind of fun and surprising, maybe where people are dressed differently. Let's go to
Or
Magic Time
dressed.
Machine where they dress, where they dress in costumes like Batman and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Let's go there. Let's go to that
Yeah.
place because that actually is fun and cheeky. And even if it's not somebody's thing, nobody's going to be offended by it. You know what I mean? It's just it's a family restaurant. It's okay, you know. Um, so yeah, I think that's how I would have brought that up. You're kind of going with the theme of something
Yeah.
different and off the wall, but just removing the danger of the situation.
Yeah. So I tell you, the most surprising thing for me about this story is that the mindset, the mentality that thought that was going to be a funny thing to do at a work event also works in a company where HR exists.
Yeah,
Like, I'm assuming it was like the top boss. So why
yeah, it was
have
the
you
owner.
hired?
Yeah,
Yeah, why have you hired HR if
and I
that's
get like, and I think sometimes, to be fair, my approach as working with companies with people operations is I'm very direct. I have a very good sense of humor. I try to be laid back about things, but I also, when it comes to that kind of stuff, I keep it, professional. We go the right way. And I have thought back on that instance so many times and thought, okay, the laid back personality might have confused him. Like that might have made him think that I wouldn't, see it the same way, or it may have just not even occurred to him. That's also like occurred, like it may have just not hit him because the world that he came from, that was a normal thing to do. And
Mm.
so, picture like a Wolf of Wall Street kind of situation, right? Like the world he came from, that was a normal thing to do. Well, not for everyone. So we have to also consider that and think about, cultural differences too. Maybe this was a thing that you did in the country you came from, or the state you came from, or the industry you came from, but that's not going to be appropriate everywhere. That's not going to be a thing for everybody. And I love what Vanessa said. So in the comments, she said that this ties into our topic last week of forgiveness. And so when you're thinking about, people who get into a screaming match at work, how do you not only work towards forgiveness between the two of them, but get the staff to be able to truly forgive and feel comfortable again?
I need to be careful answering this question. Has to be acknowledging that something went wrong, whatever the situation is. I mean, whether it's shouting match or something work related has gone wrong. If there is
Or
fault on the
essentially
part,
taking your staff to a strip club, like
well, yeah,
that
yeah.
also.
I mean, that was the wrong thing to do, guys. Yeah, I shouldn't have done that. I apologise. That has to be the starting point, doesn't it? I mean, you can't. I mean, you can have forgiveness if you're like really magnanimous as a person without having an apology first. But for the majority of people, you need to hear that S word first, don't you? And then I think you've got to enter into a conversation about why that happened and what's going to be done to stop it happening again, particularly when we're talking about such extreme cases.
Right. Yes. And this is, I think, rings true for inclusion issues, things like that as well. The acknowledgement, and I've done shows about, and I've done talks about, firing the jerk and getting rid of the jerk. And I always get asked, how do you know the difference between a jerk and somebody who's just had a misstep or just a bad day, off moment, whatever? And my response is always, you can tell in the reaction. When you approach them about it, how do they respond? And if somebody says, oh my gosh, I hadn't thought this through, or I didn't see it that way, I'm sorry, how can I do better, or let me make this right? We don't have a jerk. We have somebody who has just made an error. But when there's the defense and the excusing, then you're going to have to start watching. And if they push back and try to put it back on you, you absolutely have a jerk. And one of the things that I've seen a lot in my career, especially when there were situations where things got heated, is people trying to defend their response. And I'm like, nope, no excuse for this. No excuse. There's no, I had a bad day. There's none of that. In fact, one of the best examples I have about this is that years ago, I had a situation at a security company I worked with that one of the guards uh, was speaking in front of, clientele with at the building at which she worked with her supervisor, who then called her the N word, and it was on tape and everything. Like this is undisputed, and you could see in the tape she just slaps it out of pure reaction. And she walks into my office and just she knew that she had to be turned because that was the policy. You can't lay hands on somebody, so she knew she was going to be terminated. Her attitude was great. We actually got her an interview the same day because I felt bad for her. I was like, I don't think she's a violent person. I think she just,
Mm.
you know, just didn't respond well in that situation. Um, but the other person excused their behavior and talked about how she was the problem and how they shouldn't be let go because they were the victim of being slapped. And I said, but you also did this
Mm.
thing. So I to just very much hit home. I very much think that taking the personal responsibility is a huge part of healing from anything, period, especially in the workplace.
Yeah, but I think, I mean, there's another good point there as well, which is that everyone has their limit. Everyone can be pushed too far. I mean, sometimes it's something like that where I think most people would think that's a reasonable response, at least, if not the right one. It's
Unfortunately
understandable.
illegal, but yes, very
It's
understandable.
understandable. Yeah,
Very
reasonable is the wrong word.
understandable.
You're right. But I think, yeah, and it's knowing the context, isn't it? Not just of the situation, but of the person. Like, might have just had a terrible day or week at home for whatever reason, or their boss might have just shouted at them first or something, and none of us heard it. So it's yeah, it's getting to the root cause of why it's happened as well. Like I said earlier, but from both perspectives, I think is important. We don't want to just
100%.
immediately jump to firing people unless there's a law that says we have to.
Well, right, which in this case there kind of was. There was policy and there was
Yeah.
reason. So I had to kind of do it. But to your point, another time, and this is something that happened to me, one of my team members got very upset about something going on with the company. Not really at me, but to me, if that makes sense. I was just the one receiving the frustration and got so heated that people had to come in and check on me. They were actually worried for my safety. Now, I wasn't actually in any danger, but that's the way that it sounded. The executives got word of this and I just had sent him to calm down. The executives got word of this and we had to terminate because they weren't had. I understand why. I understand why they made
Mm.
that call. I always later I found out some trauma that had happened to this person. And what really got me is I knew something was off and I made the excuse in my brain of, oh, I'm so busy. I don't, if they want to tell me, they can tell me. But if I had done my job and as a leader and stopped and called that person in and worked with them, then things would have ended differently. And that's the one thing in my career that I have like that little rock that just kind of sits there, that little guilt rock, because I was like, oh, I messed that up. And it had real life effects for that person because had I done my job better, I think that all of that would have been handled differently. And I think that person would have still had their job with us. So that just kind of sits. So how do you like sometimes when something happens, I think we also have to look at ourselves and say, what like did I have a part? Could I have done better? What can I learn from this? Even if they were wrong too, what can I learn from this? Do you have any examples of a time, maybe yourself or somebody else, where something like that happened and then they did grow and were able to do better next time?
I certainly learned from that situation. Um, what I learned was that wasn't the right environment for me to be working in anymore.
And sometimes that's a good lesson.
I think so. I wouldn't be doing things like this had I not
Yeah.
learned that lesson. So, yeah, as to what happened in that exact situation after I left, I don't really know. I mean,
But
I've
you know
heard
what though? I want
stories,
to I
but
want to
that's
hit on
all.
the beauty of the lesson that you just said because you reflected and you said, "What can I do about this?" And the answer was leave. And sometimes you can't do that immediately. Sometimes you have to wait till you get another job, and that's fine. But I think we do have to remember to take responsibility for choosing to be around that. We're not forced to work anywhere. We can leave. And it may take time, it may not be immediate, but we can leave. And so I do think it's important to take that power onto ourselves and say, I don't have to take this. Bye.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it speaks to the company culture as well, and the responsibility of leadership in that
Yeah.
aspect too. Because in a lot of ways, I mean, if you're not intentional about that culture, it will just become the norm of whatever the worst behavior is that you tolerate as the
Yeah.
leader. And I think that was another lesson I took from that situation. But also, how it's handled afterwards and the communication piece of all of that. Um,
Yeah.
you need to talk about it. Like, you can't
Yes.
just try and pretend it didn't happen or gloss over it, or oh, it wasn't that bad, guys. People raise their voices sometimes. It just means they're passionate.
Oh,
That whole thing.
I hate that. We've all heard it and I hate it so
Haven't
much.
we? Yeah.
Yes. So how would you address that? I mean, like not necessarily that exact situation, but in general, when something like that happens, how would you tell people to address it?
I think whoever the leader of that person is needs to have that conversation behind closed doors and get to the bottom of why it's happened. Is it something outside of work? Do they need time to go away and deal with it? Is it something to do with work that you've missed that needs to be dealt with? Or both, perhaps. And once you've had that conversation, as I said, you need to make sure that the apology happens, that there's the
Yeah,
opportunity for forgiveness, and everyone can move forward as a united team, hopefully. But
yeah.
you can't just ignore it.
No, you can't.
That's the
You
mistake
have to
most
talk.
people make. They try to
Yes.
ignore it.
Yes, you can't. You have to talk about these things that happen. So when something messed up happens, you have to address it. You have to bring, and it could be something that was intended as funny, like my story. It can be something that just happens and it blows up, like with your story, but you have to address it. And you have to let people know why things were handled a certain way. Let them talk through it. Maybe there's something you didn't know that will come out of that too. Um, and and you have to then talk about how you're going to heal from it. So this happened. It shouldn't have happened. Here's how it should have been handled. This is what we will do going forward. How does everybody feel about that? What do we think about that? And then just kind of go on from there. But you have to talk about, again, people miss that step. Like you said, they just try to gloss over it, like, oh, we'll just never talk about it again.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Yeah. Or they just immediately fire the person and
Yeah.
there's never any real resolution for everyone else.
Yes,
Um,
exactly.
But I think, another really important aspect of the communication around it is actually, it's as you say, how does everyone feel about that? Have the
Yeah.
conversation. Maybe you need to have that conversation separately from the person who's caused the
Yes.
issue. Like
Yes.
people might not feel
100%.
comfortable otherwise talking about it, but
Yes.
some people might not have been bothered by it at all. Other people
Right.
might be like, "This is terrible. I can't work here anymore.
Yeah.
I'm off."
Yeah.
If you don't have the conversation, you don't know, and if you don't know, you can't deal with it
Yeah.
adequately.
And I think, and this is something I started doing later in my career, is I would have these conversations with people about the effect it had on them. And then when I went back to talk to the person that had done the thing, I would let them know and I wouldn't tell them who or anything, but I would let them know the effects that they had on their coworkers. And what I learned is that that hit a lot more real than just saying you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. When people
Mm.
actually heard that they caused this pain, this issue, this fear, whatever it is, this discomfort, that would hit a lot better and it would be received a lot more effectively than just "Hey, you suck." Which now sometimes you've just gotta do it. Like
Yeah. Just gotta be honest, haven't you,
yeah, you're
sometimes?
just like, oh yeah, this isn't good. You're not good. So the last one I wanted to share is kind of more interesting and bizarre because it
Mhm.
didn't hurt anybody per se, but it did create a very weird and unsettling feeling in the workplace. So years ago, I was managing a large team, 20 some odd people, which if in recruiting is big. Um, and one of our people one day, somebody else in the company sees him and goes, I need you to come to my office, tells me that I need to go to their office. And when I get in there, they hand me a file and it's the same person with a different name, different information. And so we investigate and then we bring the person in and ask them, and they say, oh, that's just something I do sometimes. Don't worry about it. We said, whoa, 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 whoa. What is this? Turns out it was their deceased twins information and they toggle back and forth between using the two identities.
Ooh.
Now, this person did not do anything harmful to the actual team, was doing a decent job of working, but and we had to let them go because it was a felony.
Yeah, I
But
was gonna
so
say
we
fraud,
had
isn't
to,
it? Yeah.
yeah, had to let them go. Um, but what was interesting to me was how the team took it.
Mm.
They got a very uneasy, like, oh, what else was going on? What else was happening? It was a
Mhm.
very wary situation. And we actually had to talk through it and work through some
Mhm.
emotions. And I was not expecting that. I thought everyone would just be amused by it like I was, but oh no, this got very scary for them. And they got very worried. And we had people like checking to make sure that he didn't commit identity theft on them, which he didn't. But it was very interesting. So thinking about stuff like that, that's just kind of more bizarre. Like, what do you think the difference is in terms of handling it? Is it like you still go through the exact same kind of processes and work through it, which I initially missed that step and then had to go back, realizing
Right.
the issue that it caused? Or do you like, so do you initially just go through that, or do you just kind of wait and see how people feel about it?
It's difficult. I think the common thread is trust, isn't it? And I
Mm.
can see why people would have a reaction to something like that, because if you can't even trust that someone's name is real, like, what else can't you trust? I mean, it's the most
Yeah,
basic piece of information, isn't it?
right. Yeah.
Yeah, I can also understand why it caught you by surprise though, because yeah, it is a bit of a silly one in a lot of
Yeah, I was
ways.
just like, well, what a weird, and the response
Yeah,
was priceless. Oh, it's just something I do sometimes.
yeah,
No, like, you
yeah.
can't just commit a felony and act like it's no big deal.
I guess it depends on like the severity and the impact it has on the team, doesn't
Right,
it? About whether you can just wait and see, or whether you have to immediately start talking about it.
right, exactly. And I think that I like to play it by ear because that's just kind of what you have to do. Watch people, see what they need. Sometimes just let people know that you are there to talk in case they
Right.
wanna. Maybe they don't,
Mm.
maybe they do, you know? Um, and even with things that happen globally that affect people, that's another great way to handle it is we're here if you need us, but you know, no obligation. We're not going to call a big old town hall meeting about it, but we're
Mm.
here if you need us. We're here if you need to talk things out or take a break or whatever it is. So thank you very much for talking about these bizarre situations that happen in the workplace with me today and kind of trying to work through a calm resolution and how to work through it. And I love that we tied into the same conclusion that Vanessa and I came to last week in our episode about forgiveness, which is that acknowledgement of the problem and then strong effort to resolve it in collaboration with those that have had to deal with it is very important. So, as we wrap up, David, tell people how to find you, about your show, all of that.
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks for having me. The show is called Leading with Integrity. You can find it by searching those three words on any of the podcasty places. You can also visit www.leadernotaboss.com, sign up for the newsletter, join the community.
It's a good community. I'm a fan. All right. So, thank you so very much, David, for joining us. Thank you, everybody. Same time, same place, new subject next week. Be great. Bye.
Bye.